Hi, it's Mark Foster, producer of the Pawlik Automotive podcast and video series. We're here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver, 20-time winners, best auto repair in Vancouver, as voted by their customers. And of course, today we're talking cars. How you doing, Bernie?
Doing very well this morning.
So, Audi. We're going to talk about the Audi. How reliable are Audi vehicles?
Well, generally, I'd say they're quite reliable, and but they do need a fair number of repairs and service over time. There are a couple of models that are probably a little more problematic than others, but generally, I mean, they're a very nicely built car, and usually, I tend to think of reliability as, can I go out and start my car and will it drive me to where I want to go? And generally, Audis are really good in that department, but they do have a number of problems and issues that come up from time to time, some more common than others.
So what are some of those problems that you see with them?
Well, why don't we start and sort of break the car down into different areas, because and sort of look at the reliability of each piece, because there's a number of factors. We can start with things like, let's start with the brakes and under the car. So I mean, brakes generally are quite reliable on these vehicles, but some of the larger SUVs like the Q7s, the brakes do tend to wear quite quickly. It's a heavy vehicle. Even though they have enormous brakes, they do tend to wear quite fast. On the cars, the lifespan is pretty normal. I think, 50 to 80,000 kilometer range. And if you have one with a standard, you're going to get a lot more life out of the brakes than you would with an automatic. So brakes are good. Brake fluid flush is certainly a service that needs to be done on a regular basis, usually about every 2 years. But that's not really a reliability factor. So we've got the brakes there.
Steering and suspension?
Yeah, steering suspension. So for the steering suspension, generally, again, steering components are pretty reliable. A tie rod end will wear out here and there. Again, as the car gets older, some control arm bushing issues. Again, these have some fairly complex suspensions in some of them, and ball joint wear is also common in some of them. Again, this is over time. We're talking over 5 years, in the 5 to 10 year old range of the car and older. So yeah, that's kind of steering suspension. Shocks and struts are generally pretty good, but given if you keep the vehicle long enough, those kind of components will wear out over time.
What about the drivetrain?
Drivetrains are pretty reliable, but there are some transmission issues. Audi's use a variety of transmissions. They've got standards in a lot of vehicles. They've got that direct DSG, the direct shift gearbox automatics, which apparently there's a lawsuit out around. We haven't seen any problems ourselves in our shop, but there's certainly some issues going on with some of those. Clutch replacement, we seem to do maybe a little more often than needed. I think things in the clutch, it's not so much wear, but something will actually break or malfunction in the clutch. And some of them, a lot of them use dual mass flywheel clutches, so they can be pretty expensive to fix. Some standard transmission bearing wear, happens from time to time, and the automatics generally are pretty reliable. But the two-wheel drive models use a CVT transmission, and they can be very expensive to fix as well. So, but the overall, like the all-wheel drive systems are really quite reliable, and I can't really think of anything we've ever done to fix an all-wheel drive problem on an Audi. So, they are also very good in terms of the way they distribute their all-wheel drive. In terms of driving. The way the distribution works to each wheel and providing the traction you need. But overall, that part of the drivetrain is pretty good. And I'm not saying transmissions are bad, but there are some probably more issues with them than a lot of other cars.
What about the engine and cooling system?
Engine and cooling system, yeah, that's kind of the big part. And this is where Audi's probably, more issues happen than other things. I mean, there are oil leaks that happen on a lot of different models. Some of them can be pretty difficult to fix. I mean, there are some, I'm thinking about, like there's an S4 model with a V8. Now the S4 is it's like an A4, but they've actually crammed a V8 into this, and it's a pretty spectacular vehicle to drive. But when there's an oil leak in that, it's basically pull the engine out time to fix. So that can be very expensive to fix. And all of the engines tend to develop oil leaks over time. The, cooling systems, there are a lot of plastic parts, and so they will develop leaks over time as well. Engines generally, like the actual guts of the engine, are pretty good, with the exception of a couple models. Like the Q5 comes to mind. There's a lot of oil consumption issues with those those engines. And, to me, that's kind of a showstopper sort of problem. Although, if you have to add a liter of oil every couple thousand kilometers, it's kind of annoying, but it's really not the end of the earth. I mean, that's, compared to the way cars used to be built a long time ago, that was not a huge amount of extra work. But nowadays we kind of expect our cars to go a long ways without having to add any oil. But, that to me is probably maybe one of their more problematic engines, but they're, generally the engines are pretty reliable. There are sensors, things like oxygen sensors that wear. And of course, the biggest thing that seems to go on Audis and Volkswagens are ignition coils. But the good news about that is they're cheap. Audis have, sort of in the last decade or two, they've used the same ignition coil on their 4-cylinders, their V8s, and they're quite inexpensive. And generally easy to replace. They sort of pop out and they don't require a lot of labor to replace. So that's one edge that they've got, although they do tend to fail a little more frequently. So, I mean, overall the engines are good, but there are some expensive things to do. And timing belts are another area. So some engines have timing belts, some don't. A lot of them are chain driven, and it's important that you, as an owner, that you know which one it has, because of course if it has a timing belt, you do need to replace that at the recommended interval. But this just reminds me, in the early days, the early A4s when they came out, when they were really good, they kind of, to me, that when they switched to an A4, that's really where Audi became a sort of a decent vehicle. Before that, they were kind of a bit oddball and quirky, but they kind of became a little more mainstream. And we had a client with one that the timing belt started making this clattering noise, and they used the most bizarre tensioning mechanism. I can't really describe it here, but I looked at it and go, this is supposed to be like a highly engineered car. And this is like it uses like little ball socket joints on the tensioner. Of course, the replacement part was a regular style hydraulic oil filled tensioner. And I don't know why they use that in the first place, but every once in a while you find a strange thing like that. But then that was only for the very early, I think, a 97, 98 sort of model. So you'll never see that on anything newer. But and to say, if you got a timing belt, you need to know that it needs to be done. Timing belt is definitely a maintenance thing if the engine has one, and a lot of them don't.
Interior body and electrical system issues.
Pretty good overall. I think, these are obviously nice. They're, to me, Audi's, it's the luxury brand of Volkswagen, so there's a lot of fancier stuff, but generally things seem to operate pretty well. We don't repair a lot of electrical issues with these cars. The things like the power windows are pretty reliable. Door locks, those kind of things are all pretty durable. With any car, if you keep it long enough and it gets old enough, something will happen. But it's not a problematic area for sure. Bulbs tend to, on the models that have replaceable bulbs, because this is starting to become a thing of the past with LED lights, but those vehicles, bulbs tend to burn out. I had a client with a Q7. I remember every time he'd come in for a service, it was at least a few times a year because he drove a lot. There would be like 5 bulbs burnt out in the vehicle. And of course the dash would be lit up like a Christmas tree warning you that your lights are out. It's good having those warnings, but it's kind of annoying because it always seems like there's something wrong with your car. But, electrically they're pretty good. Problems that people might have would be more unusual than normal.
So on all these things, would you say that you see the S models or the RS models a little more often just because they're more high, very high end, high performance range in the Audi series?
We don't see a lot of RS model. There's the RSs are even rarer. We do work on a few of them. The S's a little more, but more of the cars we work on are the regular, the lower end, the A line kind of models. But the S's are kind of the same thing, but they just cram something a little more high performance in. And along with that, it comes more expensive repairs. So just so you know, if you're going to buy that, you're going to get a much fancier car, much faster, more fun to drive, and more expensive to repair car. That answers the question.
Absolutely. So what maintenance service is required to keep all these Audis running well?
Well, certainly regular service. So changing the oil as recommended, and actually I'd suggest not just as recommended by the manufacturer, but more frequently, because a lot of these, they're all synthetic oil changes. A lot of them they stretch the interval out a long ways, and it's better to do it probably. We can discuss that kind of thing, or find, you you can discuss that with your service provider. But more frequently than the manufacturer recommends, I think is a good practice. Some other services, of course, there's brake fluid that should be flushed, and engine coolant once in a while. There's other fluids that drivetrain fluids that need to be changed. These aren't frequent services that need to be done. They're in the 50 to 100,000 kilometer or 30 to 60,000 mile kind of range services. But fuel services are a really important thing, especially with a lot of newer generation Audi products. I say newer generation, like last 10 years, even a little longer now, use a direct fuel injection system, and carbon deposits on valves can be a really big issue. So there's a cleaning services. It's like a direct injection cleaning, fuel injection cleaning service is really highly recommended. Probably every 30,000 kilometers, 20,000 miles. It's really important to do that, because if you get too much carbon buildup on the valves, the engine can sometimes require disassembly to fix that. So this is a place you don't want to go. And the services are not that difficult to do and not that expensive. For the older models before the GDI systems, like direct injection systems, and Audi often calls them FSI or TFSI systems, with a motor vac fuel injection type cleaning works really well to keep combustion deposits under control and keep the engine running well. And of course that, part of good maintenance is using good quality gas. And that doesn't mean necessarily premium gas as opposed to regular. It's good to use what's recommended. And a lot of Audis will use premium because they're turbocharged performance engines. But using a top tier rated gas is good because they put the right additives in to keep the engine clean.
And how would you compare Audi with Mercedes, BMW, and Porsche?
They're all kind of different. They all have their problems. They all have their issues. I'd say that, I'd say Audis are a little more reliable and less problematic than BMWs, maybe a little worse than Mercedes. It's kind of hard to say. And it really depends from model to model. I mean, they all have their goods. They all have their bads, but they're all up there. And, I like to kind of call finicky German cars. They're some in some ways just a little bit overly complicated in many areas, and a little more problematic. But I mean, I think they're all I'd say they're all kind of in the same realm.
And you're saying this as a Mercedes owner.
Yeah.
and BMW owner.
And a BMW owner. And I have to say, I like the Mercedes better. I find it's a little more reliable, but it depends from model to model.
So there you go. Audi vehicles. If you need any service or repair on your Audi in Vancouver, BC, Canada, the guys to see are Pawlik Automotive. You can reach them at 604-327-7112 to book your appointment. You have to book ahead. They're busy. Or check the website, pawlikautomotive.com. Hundreds of blog posts and video posts on there about all makes and models and types of repairs for many years, and as well our YouTube channel, Pawlik Auto Repair, where we have hundreds of videos. And of course, we really appreciate you listening and watching the podcast. And thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for watching and listening.